Now I'm hoping everybody's in. I'm just gonna give that kind of that wait for the, I call the stragglers, the people like me that are like, okay, what link am I using? But this is the career panel number 2. We have an excellent panel of 3 GIS. I don't even call them professionals because we kind of determine we all kind of have our own ways of using GIS in this world, and what uh, excuse me, and how we got into this business. So I'm going to ask the panel a few questions, but I also will take other questions through Q&A. So if you have anything based on the bios, any specific questions you want, either for me to answer or for one of the panelists to answer, then because I didn't know the panelists, I think, can see the questions too. So I just want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to do that. But again, I hope day 2 is going well for everybody. And my name is Erin Much. I am with UC Merced. I guess this realm is especially interesting to me because I've had a great opportunity to work with students and placing them in specific careers that are GIS related, and try to guide and counsel those who are like, what do I do? How do I get there? Even before I worked at the UC, I worked in community colleges and did a lot of work with adult reentry students. So people that ended up on disability because of their job. Like I had a butcher who took a lot of my GIS classes and ended up being an amazing GIS coordinator. And he did it like a mid-career transfer. So that was really impressive. So I really can't wait to hear the feedback from our panel. And so I'm going to go through the introductions. I'm not going to read the bios. I think we're going to copy paste those into the chat. But first we have Cam Denney from Alameda County Food Bank. Cam received a master's degree in geography from UC Davis. And we'll go into the details of what he teaches QGIS classes in the evenings through Bay Geo. That's awesome. I used to love night teaching. Cam also previously worked for CART at Facebook, curating data that goes into maps. So I'm gonna have some really interesting insight from that perspective with social media. We also have Cecilia Vu from ESRI. She's working at ESRI as a solution engineer. Prior to her role at ESRI, she studied urban studies and planning at UC Berkeley with a minor in GIS technology. And then lastly, we have, sorry, my dog is obsessively chewing her paw, so it's distracting me a little. We have Martha Morrissey, development seed. So she's a machine engineering learner. Machine learning engineer. I tried to combine 2 words into one at Development Seed. Her expertise around machine learning models to solve urban challenges. Martha has a MA and a BA from University of Colorado and at UC Berkeley. So again, the full bios will go into chat. So I'm going to start. What I'll do is I'll start with the panelists in order with the first question that I have, and then the remaining questions, all 3 of you can kind of exchange, like you're kind of imagine we're sitting maybe at a social distance table, 6 feet apart, or in front of an audience that we can have exchange of thoughts and ideas within the panel. So I'm going to start with Cam. Welcome. And thank you for being here. And so the questions that will come up, and then Cecilia and Martha can prepare themselves, is really, what was your initial exposure to GIS, and what theme drew you in? Because that is like what application or what was something that drew you in that made you want to study or get into a GIS field?
Sure. Well, thanks, Aaron, and yeah, thanks for having us. I think for me, I got into GIS maybe a little bit later in my life than many of the people attending this conference, but after I did undergrad and I kind of wandered around a lot and had many different jobs, and a lot of them were in education, or I worked for the Forest Service for a little while, and there was just kind of a theme in a lot of those jobs was mapping and spatial things. So as I was planning to go back to grad school, geography is what really stuck with me as kind of this theme that I was interested in, and a variety of different jobs that I had. And yeah, then I kind of started dabbling in ArcGIS Online, QGIS a little bit before grad school, and then realized that's kind of the thing I wanted to study. And then I went to Davis, UC Davis, for a master's program in geography from 2016 to 2018. So finished that 2 years ago or so. Yeah, I think that was the answer to the question.
Hi, my name's Cecilia Vu, and I can go next. So I think one of my classmates who was sitting next to me in my urban studies class, she had introduced to me this idea of GIS. And at the time, I was just taking data science courses and learning about how to analyze different tabular data in Excel sheets in different ways. And I thought that because the class that I was interested in, or she introduced me to, also had a good mixture of data science, but also GIS. I wanted to explore what it was just because I didn't know so much about it. Um, and I took the class and I just fell in love with how like the logic really carried out, how to solve the world's most challenging problems using not only mapping but kind of the algorithms behind the analysis. So, for example, network analysis and spatial analyst, the tools that were specifically under those categories were some of my favorite tools to use and to see and analyze problems in different ways. And after that, I just went down this rabbit hole of searching what were the possibilities in GIS, and I stumbled upon ESRI and just kept tunneling through my way. Um, and I think, like, for the most part, I focus a lot on how to build smarter cities with GIS and the commercial sector with GIS. And then I'll switch it to Martha.
Thanks. So I first discovered GIS when I was studying abroad my junior year in Australia. I did my undergrad at UC Berkeley, and I thought the class was really exciting, and the GIS, as everyone else has said, was a really powerful tool. And the class was about urban planning and also the conflict between humans and wildlife. So I was just really interested. And like Cecilia said, I was really interested in diving deeper behind when you were clicking the buttons for these tools, really understanding the algorithms beneath the surface. And then I kind of shifted to the more technical side of geography when I got back from that study abroad to try to learn more about that.
Well, I get the vibe. I mean, this is a great panel, and you're kind of you're on you're on the other side of GIS that I wish I was. I'm trying to get there, if that makes sense. You know, machine learning, data science, that kind of thing, where people mid-career like me started out with, you know, scripting, just to automate maps, but not, and then going into the GUI interface. So I think it feels to me that um, the field is not really driven by the GUI interface, as more as you have a geographic question that you need answered, and it's not about the software, right? It's about the theme and the application. So then I'm gonna put all three of you together, and of course we can still go in order. And I'm trying to think of the next question here. So, so how do you, you're fairly new, so this question may not be appropriate or not appropriate, but like, what are the type of tools do you usually use to do geospatial analysis? And how do you handle the ever-changing technical changes in our field? And maybe you're not exposed to those as much as an older person like me, but like how do you handle how things change so often? So I don't know if who wants to start that conversation?
I can start. I guess I went first for the last one too. I guess the first question of what tools I use. I'm a very heavy QGIS user, mostly because my current job, which is for a nonprofit, and even my previous job, which was for a tech company, neither of those companies purchased licenses to ESRI software. So I'm kind of all aboard like the open source QGIS train. No offense, Cecilia, to ESRI stuff, but actually my current organization does use. Recently, I convinced them to purchase like ArcGIS Online packages because I think that's a very effective way of communication. So I do use some ESRI software as well, and then I use R a lot for scripting and kind of anything on the data side, or not the cartography side of things. Because I went to UC Davis, so I'm sure many of the UC Davis people here will use R also. Davis, I know, is maybe heavier in the R world than other UCs because Robert Hyman's one of the geography professors is like a GIS R wizard. So yeah, those are I think my two main technical things. And then Aaron, your question about keeping up to date with how technology and software changes. For me, I teach these QGIS classes in the evenings with Bay Geo, and I think that's a great organization, but I know there's tons of organizations that do online classes, especially now in 2020. But I think that's helped me learn to use QGIS in ways that I'm not often challenged to in my job. It's like to use some different tools and aspects of the software that I don't use day to day as much, and make sure that I'm up to date on the newest version and kind of the latest updates to that. So I think for me, it's been teaching those classes, but I think for all the students in this class, it could be just kind of trying to work on a little side project or something that is using things outside of your normal main task for work or school or whatever it might be.
When you bring up a good point, because I remember teaching 15 years ago while I was consulting, and that was how I kept up with everything because I had to. So yeah, teaching others how to use the tools really make you, even though maybe you don't think you're that good at them, but you probably are better than you think. Any opportunity to maybe train someone else is useful. Okay, so who wants to go next to talk about tools and keeping up with technology?
I can go next. So I think for me, what I like to do, and I think this is a relevant question when you're working with local and city governments as well, but we see a trend towards them shifting into this more technological space, going on to the online world, digitizing their workflows and so forth. And so in my interactions with our customers, I see the trends moving forward towards a more robust future. And I think in talking to them and understanding their workflows, my team and I always think, oh, how do we better their workflow? How do we make it more efficient? And I think that propels us to learn about different techniques, whether it's through coding or finding new ways to implement our tools and kind of mixing and matching different tool sets together to formulate that proof of concept back to our customers. And so I think that is what really keeps me up to date of what's happening in the real world or what's happening in this day and age. And in addition to that, I go to a lot of other conferences, or I'll look on LinkedIn for some relevant news articles about what others in the GIS world are doing, just to keep up with the latest trends. So I think those have been helpful for me to understand and really hone in where I can place my focus.
So for those who are not familiar with GeoNet, it did make a change, correct? They changed over. I haven't.
Yeah.
Okay. So is that a good thing?
Yeah, so hopefully with the change in GeoNet, the interface is easier for people to navigate through. That was the hope with it. So yeah, like it's a great community to ask folks around the GIS world, like, do you know how to solve this problem, or I'm running into an issue. Is there anybody who's experienced this before? It's a really great community, I'd say.
Awesome. Okay. Martha.
Yeah, so for some of the tools we use a lot of the traditional open source tools in Python. Some of the libraries we typically use for working with vector data, or GeoPandas for working with raster data, GDAL and Raster.io. And then in terms of modeling, we work a lot in TensorFlow. And for keeping up to date with what's going on in industry, we like to read research papers, follow along with other companies' blog posts, and like Cecilia said, attend conferences to just try to learn about what other people in the field have been up to.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conference. I was just gonna say there aren't any conferences. Well, duh, this is a conference, right? I mean, we're saving money on travel, and maybe, we all want to get together and meet, but maybe how we move ahead in the future will be a hybrid version of doing things like this and meeting in person. But yeah,
Aaron, can I throw out one more?
of course.
Oh, I'm wearing my Map Time Davis t-shirt because I actually, in grad school, I think I learned just as much, if not more, useful tools that I use now in like the Davis Map Time workshops. So I don't know if Michelle Tobias is in this meeting, but she runs those and she's awesome. And those were super helpful. And I know one person in the career panel yesterday mentioned that. And I'm not sure if all the other UCs have some kind of map time workshop series, but if they don't, I think maybe some people out there could get them going, because I think that's a super great way to just get people just dip into some software tools or any kind of tools and see if this is useful or something you're interested in. And there's also Map Time San Francisco, Oakland, where I live. I would guess there might be other ones in other major cities. They're a little bit on a hiatus right now because of the global pandemic and all that, but those are great resources to check out.
Well, and yeah, you bring up a good point that's going to lead me to the next question. But I've been lucky to be able to run workshops through the support of our engineering service learning program, which we do open up to our community members. It's not map time, and I need to put that on my list to look into, like how that could fit in. But I run about 6 to 8 workshops a semester, again, to try to get people in, but we don't really have that that cohort and that community yet. So which leads me to the next question is, what advice would you give to students on pursuing a career in GIS, especially for those schools that don't have a GIS program or minor, like UC Merced? I'm gonna start, Cam.
Okay. I guess for me, but everybody's case is different, and it sounds like Martha's job and Cecilia's job are quite different than mine. So I'm sure we'll all have different advice on what tools to learn or what to do. But I think one thing for me that was very valuable is not only my master's thesis was a good project that I could kind of talk about and help market myself in terms of getting jobs, but also just small side projects that I did to kind of start to create a portfolio coming out of grad school or even for undergrads. I think that's people like to see that what you've done, and I think maps are so cool because they're very visual, and it's a very kind of an easy thing to talk about in a job interview or to have a little portfolio website. So, for example, there's like if anybody lives in like the Oakland area, there's a pizza chain called Zachary's Chicago Deep Dish Pizza, and they have art contests. And I learned some QGIS tools by making a map for this pizza place, and that's one of the things in my portfolio, for example. So that's my suggestion.
That's very cool.
I want to comment a little bit. I know Zachary's. It's really good if you're in the Oakland area. I recommend. Sorry, didn't mean to cut off.
Oh no, jump on in. You can answer the question too.
Oh yeah. I think one of my professors, when I was going through classes in Berkeley during my undergrad years, he told me that, you know, having a project, even if it's just one showcase project, for you to show recruiters would really help during the recruiting process and help you find roles if you're serious about, you know, entering the GIS realm. And I took that to heart, and it hasn't disappointed me yet. So I think like one of my first few projects that I created in my classes was figuring out, and it was really funny because it happened a year after we did the project, but it was trying to figure out where Amazon should locate their next headquarters. Unfortunately, it's not like something that we pitched to Amazon per se, but I just found it funny that it coincidentally became something that they were thinking about the next year. And their new office, I think, turned out to be somewhere in the DC region. But it's like projects like that that really are eye-catching to recruiters, I would say. It's all about how you apply GIS, not only what tools you can use in the GIS realm. So that's just one example. Another example, and I think it's relevant to what's been happening in California, at least, are wildfires. And so for that one, I think I was analyzing which areas in the mountains would accumulate the most debris flow from the fires. And I think that was another instance or example that I usually tell recruiters when they ask me about my experience. So just keep those projects and stories in mind.
Okay, Martha, how do you, what advice would you give students maybe who have access to limited training, or they don't have a GIS minor per se, but want to get into this career?
Yeah, so to build off of what Cecilia and Cam have already said, I think pursuing some sort of, if you have the opportunity in undergrad and undergrad thesis would be a really good idea. You could kind of get extra mentorship and attention from a professor, which I thought was really valuable. And also you could kind of go in and have a domain knowledge coupled with GIS skills. I think that's really powerful and really important. Like if you're really interested in urban planning or understanding like human wildlife interaction or agriculture, those can be really good domains. That GIS can be another powerful tool to take your analysis to the next level. Like Cam, I also found that going and getting a master's degree was super helpful. But I know that's not for everyone. But it let me dive deeper into my research and gather more skills. And I know side projects have already been mentioned, but if people are more interested on the coding and technical side of GIS, there's a really robust open source community around that. And you can kind of get on the GitHub if there's libraries you use and look at common issues and try to contribute back to the open source community. Yeah, I think that's all I have.
I muted myself and then unmuted. Kind of going into the next question, even though Cecilia answered it in chat, I want to talk about what makes a good resume, and if how you could maybe construct your online portfolio, if you know if there's any references, if there's any better application story maps versus Wix or Behance, or it sounds like GitHub is really, a great place, kind of showcase your work too. So how would you get someone started? Like, well, one, resume, how do you build a good resume? And two, what's a good way to deliver an online portfolio, or does it really matter what platform it's on?
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds like Cecilia probably knows more than I do about which platforms are good. I use Weebly, but that's just because that's what I chose like many years ago, and then I never wanted to change. But this is a little unrelated, but I do think that on May's question about story maps, I think learning how to make any kind of web map, whether it's ArcGIS Online story maps or leaflet maps, any kind of interactive web maps is really valuable. So often, if I produce some kind of map in QGIS or ArcPro or whatever, and I show it to people, I watch them try and click on things and interact with it. Like I think being able to interact with some product is super valuable. And yeah, I think ArcGIS Story Maps is like a very easy to learn platform that people are familiar with, and very user friendly. So I guess that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I would also agree with the resources that Cam mentioned. And I think in terms of your resume, because it's like outside of like side projects, which you can display on the web, you can also have, you have like a format for your resume. And one of the things that one of my previous employer had told me that stood out on resumes is that the candidates would list their skills, whether it's in R, Python, like valuable skill sets. But not only that, you also want to list what you're using it for. So for example, if you're using Python, you might say, I'm skilled in Python for data analysis or machine learning or artificial intelligence, or R for data visualizations in GIS. And I think that adds a little bit of context as to what you're using those skill sets for. And then I think I answered the question inside the chat, but I know not everybody has access to story maps or know how to use it. So I think an overarching platform that I like to use is also Wix. And it's also because you mentioned it in your question, Juan May. So yeah, great question. Martha?
I don't really have anything to add. You guys did a great job already answering that.
Well, it's kind of my question off the top of my head, because you all are very kind of on the technical side, it seems, which is a great thing, but the best tools for humanities students, and if you know of researchers or students in humanities, if they have access to these things, or if there's a cohort or group that can also kind of bring them into the mix, because I see a huge growth in the use of GIS for humanities personally, and I think they're doing a great job. But we're using the ESRI platform because it's free. So we talked about a resume. We're talking about portfolios. I've got two other questions, but I'm happy to entertain others. And then we can maybe ask each other. You panelists can ask each other questions too. But from your perspective, what are your thoughts on professional organizations like ERISA or CGIA or ASPRS and even GIS certification, and if that is something that is that still a thing? You need your GIS certificate, or you just, again, if you put on your resume, I use R, but I use R for analyzing, crime incidents or something, whatever. So I don't know who wants to answer that question first, but just the overall is thoughts on professional organizations and certification.
Oh, I guess I've never joined any of those organizations you mentioned, Erin, but with maybe, I guess Bay Geo is kind of similar to that, and I am a member of that and teach classes through them. So although maybe they're a little bit smaller than those that you mentioned. But I think this is relevant to the question, kind of. But the reason why I wanted, or I volunteered to do this panel actually was because I think my current job for a food bank is quite different than the panelists yesterday or today. Not to say it's better or worse at all, but I think that I wasn't as aware, and maybe this touches on what you were saying, Erin, with less technical students or humanities students. I think that I wasn't as aware that like a job like my current one existed or would be common as a GIS person. But I do think, obviously, most probably graduates, whether they're undergrad or grad students, will look for jobs at large companies like ESRI or Maxar or whoever, Apple, Facebook, and those places are great to work. And I used to be on a team of like, 40 GIS people, and I learned a lot through that. But there's also, I think, jobs available. Like now I'm the one single GIS person at an organization of 150 people or so. And I think that's kind of why I wanted to volunteer to talk on this, because I think it's good for people to realize that, yeah, there's other job opportunities out there than maybe the large companies that are like GIS is their bread and butter. There's a need for maps, spatial analysis, GIS in many organizations. So I think keep an eye out for that, and maybe entertain some unexpected opportunities that you might come across.
Yeah, I think well, I don't have a certification in those organizations. I know some coworkers of mine do, and I think it's helped them, solidify like, oh, this is the go-to person for imagery if we ever had questions about imagery services. I myself personally don't, so I can't speak too extensively on that. But as to what Cam was saying, I do think there are a variety of roles that embed GIS into their workflows. I've seen jobs as researchers. So before ESRI, I was a transportation researcher, and we heavily incorporated GIS into our workflows. So you can go into the fields of academia. But I think another route that you can also take is maybe like a role in consulting. I know that we worked with some consulting groups at ESRI who work heavily with GIS data. So I wouldn't say that you have to like aim for like ESRI or anything, but there are different options in terms of jobs out there if you're interested in geospatial information systems.
Well, yeah, that again, these are, you could be the one person in your organization who has these specific skills. And what was mentioned yesterday was your value, right? It doesn't really matter if you're called the GIS person or not. It's the value you're providing in utilizing the geospatial tools for to benefit your organization, whether big or small. So Martha, do you have anything to add about, thoughts on certification or professional organizations that may be useful, depending on, where you want to go?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know much about either of those.
That's okay. It's one of those things that got really hot years ago. And maybe I'll answer the question just for anecdotal. There is a push for GIS professionals, a GISP. And I, for whatever reason, decided that I already proven myself and I didn't need that. And that sounds maybe being a rebel, I guess, if you will, but I already had a master's degree. So I didn't really, in my mind, the GISP was kind of like being a professional engineer. Engineers may not have master's degree, but if they're a professional engineer and they have the certification, then they're labeled and they could put it on their card. But I think the direction that our field is going into, it's really hard to encapsulate it into like, this is, you are certified as this thing, because it's just so far reaching and there's so many tools and so many applications, and pretty much everybody uses GIS, whether they know it or not. So I don't, I'll go to Albert's question first and then switch to the next one. But Albert asked, how might you suggest others within your workplaces to collaborate across different sectors, like nonprofits, crossing over to government or profit? Is there room for technically oriented students or volunteers to kind of help in that area?
I'm not sure about volunteers exactly, but I think kind of relating to what you were just saying, Erin, about the previous question too, and Albert's question, I'm not sure, but in the career panel yesterday, there was some people who had state of California jobs or government GIS jobs, and maybe they would, I'm not sure, but maybe those folks would advocate more for GISP certification or something. That seems to me, in my mind, that seems like a thing valued by public sector jobs. But yeah, in my experience, that hasn't been something on job requirements that I've applied for or considered.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about maybe if you find volunteering activities. I know there's some organizations that like people who just volunteer themselves, and to find these volunteer opportunities, you can reach out to folks on LinkedIn to ask about their work, and just to say like, oh, how can I be more involved in this? And perhaps they'll like redirect you in some community that may need assistance in that. But I'm not too familiar on the intersections of different sectors. That's a really great question. I just wish I had more to say.
So I think I can speak to a little bit about the intersection between GIS and NGOs. Development Seed, we're like a services company. So we don't have products, but we partner and work for organizations like the World Bank and UNICEF. And we help them and provide kind of more, like they have a lot of technical people on their staffs already, but we provide them extra help. We also do a lot of work with NASA. One project that we have ongoing with UNICEF is with their Project Connect initiative. And that's about, they want to understand how well connected schools are globally to the internet. But the first thing they need to know is where schools are. And not every country has an up-to-date and accurate map of that. So what we've been helping them do is to detect schools through satellite imagery. So we work a lot with NGOs and things like that. And it's really fun to be connected with organizations like that through GIS?
Yeah, that's a great answer because uh, it is a challenge to cross over sectors. We're so busy as it is, and we're not allowed to cross over, right? Because we're distant. But yeah, how do we bridge these connections and find opportunities and I know I'm not on the panel officially, but I know from my own experiences is just I would tell organizations to reach out to the local university or even the community college that I used to work with or teach at, has a GIS program. So like contact them, contact this professor. And again, it's kind of like this network that you build geographically, right, with Bay Geo and other organizations. And yeah, I think yesterday's career panel was network, network, network. And it's hard. I mean, I think a lot of people who do what we do are kind of are introverted. At least I will admit that I prefer, I like people, but I like to be on the computer. So I'm not going to be like, hey guys, hire me. So, but you have to get your foot in the door. You have to be willing to put yourself out there and get rejected, really. So I'm gonna go to
Actually,
yeah, go
Erin,
ahead.
to your point, yeah, to your point, Erin, I think I just remembered. I also had like some few TAs and professors in college actually that needed help on like their research projects, and I think it would be really great that um, since these students are in universities, to just reach out to them in office hours or whatnot. I think that would be also a great opportunity to volunteer your services or volunteer your time to get to understand like how they apply it. Especially if you're taking like a GIS course, the professors probably are well connected in that world, so to speak. So yeah, like what you said just reminded me of that, and I just wanted to give my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's a good point, especially for students. There's a lot of researchers that they come to me, they're like, I need GIS students. They're like, we don't have a GIS program, right? Can you train them? I'm like, okay, I'll try. So, our center, Merced, bridges that. The cool thing, they do go on to work in their industry, but also with that GIS experience. So then that leads to the next question. Is it enough to merely have that GIS minor? We might have answered this already. Or should students aim to build a strong portfolio prior to their first official experience internship? And that's a tough balance. How do you get your foot in the door?
Yeah, I think we already covered this kind of, but I think a portfolio and being able to show projects that you've done is probably, at least in my experiences, just as if not more valued than a certification or the degree or the minor or what have you. So I agree, Erin, with what you said about meeting people. And actually, I think a cool thing about, at least in the Bay Area, I can speak to is, I mean, GIS is a huge field, but when it kind of comes down and you end up going to some events or taking some, going to workshops or something, like actually it's kind of a small community of map nerdy people like myself. And I think that that's pretty cool. Like once you kind of meet some of the main people, you kind of I don't know. It is kind of a community, at least in the Bay Area. Sounds like somebody mentioned, I think Albert, that LA has a strong map time too. So I'm sure it's similar in other metropolitan areas. And I think just to speak more, I guess, on the building the portfolio kind of thing is, and similar to the Albert's question about volunteering is, I think, yeah, just finding any opportunity to kind of do a, pro bono consulting. It would be maybe the most professional way to call it, but just some GIS related projects for anything you're interested in, or an organization, or just some data that you find, I think is valuable. And those things can then build that portfolio to turn into actual, maybe small side consulting gigs, which is a very I think GIS is a good skill to have for that kind of doing small side consulting, maybe slightly under the table gigs. And here's my last thing. I think I'm talking too much, but I'll put a link in the chat of a group based in Oakland who called Guerrilla Cartography. I think it's a good group to submit a map for if that's your thing. They put together atlases of maps, and it can be a cool and easy entry-level way to have a map published in like in a book.
Well, Cam, you bring up a good point, and I'll let Cecilia and Martha answer, you know, if you want to expand on that answer. But I was an accidental, reluctant consultant. I left consulting, saying I'm never going back to consulting. And then my friend's like, hey, I got this guy who needs this. I'm like, fine. And I ended up starting a very successful business for 7 years. So yeah, again, make those connections. Do the work that you feel passionate about too, because that's going to shine through in your what we call deliverables in the consulting world, but that's going to shine through in what you do, and it's going to make you stronger. So of course, Cecilia and Martha, please feel free to add before I get to the last question.
Yeah, I think I had a GIS minor myself, and I would say that there's definitely roles that you can go into with just a minor as well. Although majoring in geography may help with your knowledge and how you speak to customers and other people about GIS. Because I think like having a minor, my knowledge about those kind of things were kind of limited. But I will say having a minor in it allowed me to kind of see how GIS fit within my own major. And I think that was the most valuable thing about it, finding the intersections between GIS and different industries. So, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Martha, before we get to the next question? Or
no, I think it was already really well answered. I have an easy job being last.
Well, I do, you know, before we wrap up and people start, you know, heading off on break, I do really appreciate all of your input and insight on careers. And it's I don't call it eye-opening. It's never in, we kind of get stuck in our modalities of how we used to do things. And I'm kind of in this school of like mid-career GIS, and your early career GIS, in my opinion, and your approaches are different, but they're really cool. And that's really what I want to support for our students and industry in general, is you don't get fixed on one tool or one programming language. And really just what I've noticed in this community, once you build it or once you're in it, you know, we look out for each other. All of my former employees, I've helped them find jobs somewhere else, or I'd be like, you need to work there, and like, no, you need to work there, and they are there and they're making tons of money, which is great. But I don't know, that's how I see it. I feel like the community does feel very small, but it's also very collaborative, and like, hey, we'll look out for each other. So this is a really exciting question to me. I don't so thank you, Susan, for that. But because I struggle with this all the time, is, do you find you have to explain your job to your colleagues, especially for Cam and Martha, who don't work at GIS focused organizations? What are your tips on advocating for your work within the organization?
Martha, do you wanna take it first?
Sure. So I feel like my position is a bit different than yours, Cam. There's several other machine learning engineers at Development Seed. So I'm not like unique in what I do for them. So I think in Development Seed is pretty small. We're about 40 people. So I think people within the company understand what I do, but explaining it outside the company is definitely a challenge. I kind of describe it as basically spatial data science. If people understand what data science is, I kind of tailor my answer to my audience. And I say I work with satellite imagery a lot and helping people find things that they care about in satellite imagery and building broader tools for workflows with satellite imagery.
Yeah, I think for me, yeah, I don't know. I think externally, talking about my job to people outside of the organization, when people think of, who maybe don't know the acronym GIS, they think of cartography as the only part of maps or spatial data, and that kind of like artistic, graphic design part. But most of my job and even my previous jobs, GIS jobs, are mostly more about data cleaning and on the data side of things. So yeah, I think that maybe is one common misconception, is that like if you work on mapping, you're like a graphic designer primarily. Although I think that part is very important and maybe something I myself could improve upon. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing. Or I think, yeah, of course, there's a lot of people in my organization who aren't really sure. Will ask, can you make a map of this showing this data? But that data might not exist in the world. It's never been collected or measured at all. So I think, yeah, kind of trying to meet somewhere in the middle of, okay, well, here's some data that does exist. Is this what you had in mind, or is this good enough for those purposes? Because of course, people always want maps showing this exact thing, but that information probably doesn't exist in the world. But that's kind of our job, right? That's all of our jobs.
Well, and again, I think your answers were really good. It's people where I work in the university, I was moving towards not using GIS term anymore because it intimidated people, and like, oh, GIS, it's like, okay, yeah, spatial data science, people understand data science. I know I said I work at the spatial analysis, and you work in space. Well, I mean, this is in my local, really small town. So I can forgive that not everybody understands what spatial means in that context. But yeah, it's this struggle to, we love what we do, it seems like, and we want to justify our worth, but sometimes the things that are really difficult to do are actually easy, but the things that are really people think that are the people that think that is really easy to do are sometimes difficult, and vice versa. People think, oh, this is really difficult. We go, no, this is really easy. So it's just bridging those connections within your workplace is really important. So I'm gonna ask everybody, what keyword or phrase could you give the attendees here advice on moving into a GIS career? How would you close this off?
That's a hard question, but I think for me, my master's thesis ended up being like there was just a project that needed a researcher, and I jumped into it, and it was about looking at car accidents involving animals. So like it was my master's thesis was about roadkill, and I didn't choose that, but it ended up being really good, because I think if you have some kind of project about something weird and unique, that you can kind of communicate, not in like this academic-y, like I try and say things so only 1% of the population can understand them kind of way. I think if it's relatable and unique and interesting, I think like that's valuable.
Yeah, take the risks, put yourself out there, and don't be afraid. Martha, Cecilia, I got it. Okay.
Martha, do you want to go first? I'm still
Oh,
thinking.
sure, I can try. I would say just kind of always be open to keep learning, and then really try to find an organization that's really passionate about your like learning and continued growth. Your career is like a journey. Yeah, and I think it's really special that GIS lends itself so well to kind of constant growth and lots of new things to learn and lots of new ways to apply it. So just kind of be flexible and be always on the lookout for new paths you can take.
So
And then I think like it was emphasized in yesterday's career panel and a bit about today's career panel as well, but networking is definitely important. And I want to reframe networking in a different light because I know it doesn't have like the most positive connotation networking, especially when I was a student. But I think like in reaching out to people, you learn more about how GIS is applied in their roles and how the people they interact with use GIS. And I would recommend to harness that narrative when you're going into interviews, so that it gives you ways to speak about that niche in more ways than one. So yeah.
I was muted. Okay, well, awesome. Well, I really think, again, your feedback is really valuable and your time is valuable and hopefully inspiring to those who are looking for GIS careers, or even people like me who are trying to give advice to students at a campus, because sometimes when we're not in the we're in the workforce, but we're not in industry, or we're in certain areas, we forget kind of what's happening sometimes. I'm not making accusations, but it's important for us to understand what's going on in careers, like what kind of tools and what challenges you're facing. And so I do appreciate all of your time. And if there's not any other questions, again, just a heartfelt thank you. Stay up on Slack and connect, and hopefully, we can all, reach out on LinkedIn. Perfect. That's a great idea. I think LinkedIn is a great way to start making those connections too. So with that said, I'm gonna close the panel off, and thank you everyone, and take care, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. All right, thank you.